Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about what we mean by dependence on God. And we're going to look at that with an understanding of what we mean by dependence on God, because as we've said before, when we're looking at the word God, even that has problematic things because of its association with Christianity and how it has been normally understood. But we want to understand that as far as Swami Dayananda is concerned, being is synonymous with God. So being is synonymous with God. And the light of awareness is also synonymous with God, because for the Hindus, life, light, and fullness is embracing us at all times. Our problem is that we don't have a cognition of it. So we're not actually cut off from God in the sense that mankind is cut off from God ontologically or in terms of reality, but in terms of cognition, definitely it is the case. And so what restores our understanding of God is a cognition of what God is. Just hold 1 minute. Now, I just want to read something. This comes from, who's ever heard of Meister Eckhart? All right. Now, so in the old days, they used to refer to the soul, right, in the sense of the being, right? So, and so what he said here is, the soul is one with God and not united. Here is a simile. If we fill a tub with water, the water in the tub is united, but not one with it. For where there is water, there is no wood, and where there is wood, there is no water. Now take the wood and throw it in the middle of the water. Still, the wood is only united and not one with the water. It is different with the soul. She becomes one with God and not united. For where God is, there the soul is, and where the soul is, there God is. Quite beautiful, isn't it? Now, so what we're talking about here is we're talking about the cognition or awareness of God, right? Now, when we approach God, normally we approach God as a thinker and a doer. We're very identified in terms of in terms of what we take ourselves to be. We take ourselves to be the thinker and the emotional reactor, and we take ourselves to be the doer. So what happens is we then have this idea, okay, I've got to get towards God, so I better do something. I better do something to get to God, right? So when I do something, what happens is, I just want to check something. Marilyn, for some reason, your face is appearing and mine isn't. And I just don't know how this view works. Just a minute. It's not really working, Sylvia. I
don't know why. Marilyn, can you unmute and mute yourself and see if that helps, please?
Like you're on now.
Okay, well, because I'm talking, I'll mute myself.
So what should I be looking at?
You should be looking at yourself because you're talking. Now you should be looking at me because I'm talking.
Right, it's not really.
So whoever talks is.
Yeah, well, it's not quite working, I don't think. But anyway.
He can see you, Bede.
Sorry?
No, I
Sorry?
said we can see you. I see you on the screen when you're speaking.
Okay, okay, that's all right then. We'll keep it there then. All
And
right.
do you see me when I talk? Yeah, so it's good.
Okay. So what happens is that here I am as a doer, right? Now, in order to perform a doing, I've got to do an action in space through time, don't I? Through space and in time. So what happens is that when I'm doing an action, it's in space and it's through time. But you can't cognize the timeless through time. Does that make sense? You can't get or arrive at what is abidingly present. And remember, where the soul is, there is God. Where God is, there the soul is, as Eckhart said. So we're talking about a journey without distance. So when we're talking about the cognition of God, there's no way there's nothing that I can do that's going to create the cognition of God. Does that make sense so far? All right. And secondly, thinking. Now, thinking is an interesting thing. When we think from what Aristotle called premises, so we have a thought, you know what I mean? So a premise is that all men are mortal. And then classically, Socrates is a man, therefore what?
Socrates is mortal.
Socrates is mortal. So we think perfectly from premises, but a lot of our premises of our thinking have basically been, have come about through assumptions. We have starting points of our thinking. For example, you can't trust people, right? So if I've got that as opposed to you can trust people somewhat, but you've got to also take into account that often they can be untrustworthy. That's realistic. But if I've got you can't trust people, and then someone says, Bob says to me, Bob, Bede, can you lend me $20? No, because I'm going to just simply reason from my premises. We can't help but reason from which we take to be true. And a lot of what we take to be true has been built into us through conditioning and circumstances and all of that sort of stuff. This is called rationation. So reasoning is from the premises. You can never arrive at the truth. You can arrive at a conclusion, but you can never arrive at truth itself through reasoning. You can arrive at probably a reasonably accurate conclusion that lines up with reality, which is the whole function of thinking. But again, a conclusion, I can have a conclusion, there is a God. Well, that's a conclusion, but that's not knowing God, is it? That's a conclusion. Yes, I believe there's a God, and someone else says, well, I don't believe there's a God. So in terms of our ways of knowing, we can't reason, we can't use reason. Reason is not, the process of rationation is not knowledge. But we have a very interesting, in the old days, before the Enlightenment, there was two things. There was rationation on one side and there was intellectus on the other. And this was St. Thomas Aquinas's thing. This is the eye of the soul of the Sufis. This is the part of us that just sees directly, unmediated. There's no rationation to reach the conclusion. So, for example, when you see a beautiful sunset and you actually perceive beauty, all the senses are showing you as color and form, but you have a faculty in you that can see beauty. And you notice that when you're seeing beauty, you're just flooded with beauty, aren't you? It's not like I'm not seeing that as a direct appreciation of beauty itself in the form of a sunset, for example. This is what they mean by intellectus. It's a way of knowing, but doesn't mean rationation. So when you meet a teacher like Swami Dayananda, what happens is the rationation is set aside because he says, we can suspend judgment. And we have this faculty that is able to understand spiritual or you could say spiritual understanding, which is the intellect. Okay, and it's quite distinct from ratiocination. Are you clear on that? In our culture,
I'm sorry, just quickly, does the word intuition cover that, or is it more?
yeah. Well, that's what they mean by intuition or intuit is not mediated through rational thinking, right? So it could mean that, but what we mean is, you know, like what Aristotle wanted to do was actually discover the basic principles from which to reason. Now, once we actually have an understanding, for example, when we understand, we have the spiritual understanding that the meaning of my suffering is I'm cut off from reality. That's an understanding, isn't it? That's wisdom obtaining in me, and it's something that I know, right? Once I have that understanding and I recognize I'm upset, then I can reason from that, can't I? I can say, I'm upset, therefore I'm not acquainted with reality. So it's not that there's no reasoning in spiritual life, but it's a question, it's very important to obtain to the right starting points of our thinking. In other words, to examine our ontological assumptions, a lot of which are very, very wrong. So what happens is that when so in terms of Dayananda's teaching, what we have is, and I use the English vernacular, but we have, you know, the term, you're all familiar with the term Satchitananda. Okay, so we're going to talk about that in English because it's our language. So what happens is, what is said is that reality is abidingly present. Okay, so Sat is abidingly present. The word Sat means being. And you notice how everything is being. The chair is being, the thoughts is being, you are being. Everything, every form that we look at, have you noticed, is being. Okay, is being. So there's nothing away from being. All right, and how Swami Dayananda put it, you may have a clay pot, but you haven't got the pot hasn't got a separate be from the clay. It's actually the presence of being in the form of, it's the presence of clay in the form of a pot. The same way when we're looking at anything, the reason why he said that the starting point of Vedanta is the understanding that God is the material cause of the universe is that the being is omnipresent. So what this means is, no matter how my present experience looks to me, the presence of God or the presence of life, okay, because it's another word for being is life, not what we take to be life, but what real life is. Real life is being. We take our life, though, to be our psychological, psychophysical functions, don't we? The functioning. We say that's our life. But in actual fact, our real life is being. Our real life is God, actually. That's our real life. But we're blind to that fact often. So when we take this first word, sat or being or life, life is ever present and embracing everything. Are we all clear on that so far? Now, the Hindus also have another term, that chit, which they mean by awareness, the light of awareness. So being is also light. Now, we know this to be a fact. The moment we become directly aware of anything, any object, you know, how John likes to look at objects. He likes to look at chairs and stuff. Okay. The thing is, we know that as soon as you come into direct contact with any form, unmediated, you're filled with the light of awareness, because being is chit. All right. Being is chit. So, and notice how right here, right now, as I am, there is this light of awareness, which is not an object, but which is revealing the objects in the room that you're sitting in right now. This light of awareness. Everyone just close their eyes for a minute. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to open your eyes, but I want you not to see anything. Okay, go. You failed, didn't you? Okay, because this light of awareness is constantly revealing what's here. in terms of form. So when I become aware, in the light of awareness, I am aware. And this is the condition, not my awareness. It's only in the light of awareness do I actually see directly. Otherwise, I'm looking at my conclusions. I'm using rationation. Let's say that I think that Robert is a bit of a fool, and I've got that as a conclusion, and I meet Robert. What's going to happen is I'm going to see a fool. Can you see that? But that's not awareness. That's a projected conclusion or judgment that I take to be true. And this is the problem. Our life separate and apart from God has no life. It's just got mindless functions going on. And there's no light. There's just my own conclusions. All right? So you have life, light, and fullness. Now, fullness is an interesting word. It doesn't mean big and gigantic. That's the connotation that we have. It just means that fullness means that there's nothing needs to be added. Okay, nothing needs to be added. There's no deficiency. There's no limitation. So what the teaching says is that the presence of God, or this life, light, and fullness, is abidingly present and embracing us at all times. That's the fundamental. Now, we can't possibly arrive at this understanding through rationation or our conclusions, because we'll also, because we're a mixed bag, we'll have belief that there's a God, and we're going to have disbelief that's a God, depending on the time of day. But what we're talking about is abiding in the appreciation of the presence of being, which is the presence of light. And so when we're approaching this subject, once we understand that, I can't think my way to it and I can't do my way to it, right? This is a magnificent understanding, because then I'm not going to try and do what's impossible. In other words, reach the timeless through a time process. Or reach the unthinkable through a thinking process. It can't be done. But when we find ourselves participating in being, this is its own validation. Am I making sense here? Are we all tracking here? Yeah, what is it, Patricia? Okay. So, yep.
Excuse me. How would Swami Dayananda speak about qualifying, or would he speak about qualifying the mind to have this appreciation of God?
Right. Now, when we talk about qualification, it's receptivity, isn't it? So, for example, when I'm learning about the fact that God is the material cause of the universe, right? I have to listen to that teaching, expose my mind to it until, right, for example, until I actually can hear what is being said. Right? Now, when I hear what is being said, there's a shift in me. Now, in terms of qualifications, he would say that you need to be reasonably calm and tranquil, harmonious in yourself. And so he puts a big emphasis on Dharma, because when you're in harmony with what's in front of you, you're in harmony with yourself. If you're in a disharmonious relationship, you'll be too disturbed and you won't really be interested. But I'm not talking about that today, but that's a very important point you bring up, Bob, right? But we're not talking about qualifications at the moment. We're talking about the knowledge of what God is and abiding in that knowledge.
So, but the process you're saying, that the process of appreciating what God is,
yeah,
is a process, right?
No, I'm definitely not saying, because it's again, when you see beauty, you see beauty. When you're aware of the light of awareness, you're abiding in the appreciation of the light of awareness, you change. That's not a process.
Okay.
All right. Now, this is very important because you see, what we want to do is we want to, like what Eckhart said, I mean, where the soul is, God is, and where God is, the soul is. It's not two things joining. It's not, you see, the whole point of Vedanta, the senior principle of Vedanta, is the life and being you are is God. Okay, and when you're abiding in that appreciation, that's one, what they call oneness with God. There's not two. All right. So, and we have also the understanding of what wisdom is. Wisdom is, here I am and I'm caught in darkness. And what I mean by darkness, I mean, I'm caught in the idea that my notions and conclusions are reality, that they are true perception and their awareness. Like, have you ever thought someone was a real SOB, Bob? Have you ever had the? Have you ever?
Yes.
Okay. And when you were seeing like that, did you believe you were seeing reality?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean,
When you're
yes.
under the sway of that thinking, do you have the delusion that you are actually seeing the truth?
Yeah, no, I'm under that. I am under the delusion that they are a son of a bitch.
Right. So then you're in darkness. It doesn't
Right.
feel like darkness, though. In the same way, when we look at ourselves, we go, oh, God, I'm a bit of an idiot, or I'm a wonderful person. I look at other people, they're a great person, they're a lousy person. I'm constantly judging. This mechanism of judgment or ratiocination is continually going on. And out of that, my experience is continually arising. And I think I'm looking at reality. I think I'm alive to facts. That's not possible. It's only in the light of awareness. Am I aware? Do I come to what Dayananda calls objectivity? In other words, because it's there, I'm seeing it. And when it's like that, there's not a judgment that's determining what I'm seeing. I might have a judgment about what I'm seeing, but I'm alive to what's in front of me. I'm in relationship. When I'm not alive to facts, I'm not in relationship. I'm not in the world as it is. I'm in the world as I see it, which Dayananda called my own world. And he said the whole purpose of karma yoga is where a situation where there's less of you and more of Ishvara. The very living presence of the given. Now, is the living presence of the given an idea, or is it a fact? It's a fact, isn't it? It's a fact. So so once we understand that we're not talking about an idea about God, what we want to do is we want to come into an existential recognition and appreciation of what God is. That means it's an understanding that changes my being. Because if I have, you see, in Vedanta, if to know is to be. So if I am abiding in the presence of God, that will transform my way of being. If it doesn't, it's not real. So what Swami Dayananda says, that when you actually know what it means to right here, right now, as you are, appreciate the presence of God, you find that you are different. You are being different. And in factual fact, you only rest in being by being. That's the, there's no trying to get there. You rest. It's only when we are being are we rooted in God. All right. So the thing is that even what I'm talking about now, I'm using his words and all of that he said. As I talk, you might be able to see what I'm saying, that the very living presence of the given, of course that's there, isn't it? But when you're seeing someone in an SOB, Bob, are you aware of the living presence of the given, or is it because you're seeing it, it's there?
The latter.
The latter. And so what he says is, what we want is we want to be less of us and more of God. He says We need to live in God's world, not our world. And so when we're living in the world of the given, what happens is there's a qualitative shift. We appreciate ourselves as conscious, a simple, quiet, conscious being. And we're conscious because we're filled with the presence of reality. That's what makes us conscious. I can't make myself conscious. It's only when I come into relationship with the very presence of reality do I become conscious. I can't get there. It's only through knowledge, which is if once we have the understanding of what God is in the light of Dayananda's teaching, it opens up a whole new range of cognition for us. In other words, when we're living in God's world, we appreciate ourselves as quiet and conscious. And we're going to just prove this now, okay? So what I want you to do is, with this understanding and bearing in mind that we can't get to God, we can't know God through ratiocination, we can only know God by being what we are. And God is not away from what we are being. Like what Eckhart said, where God is, the soul is, where the soul is, God is, right? So what Dayananda says, in order to, an appointment with the Lord is an appointment with yourself. The appointment with self is an appointment with the Lord. So the location is not away from us. Now, that means that my present experience is a manifestation of the presence of God, positive or negative. So what I want to do is I want to appreciate myself as a simple conscious being rooted in being. But I can only do that by being. And so, in other words, living this understanding. What Dayananda says is two things. There's the wisdom, which is the knowledge of, oh my goodness, the very presence of the given is the presence of the giver. Oh my Lord, right? Ooh. Right. So once I understand that, I can then live that wisdom, can't I? In other words, if I go quiet and let the presence of being become evident, I'm just simply resting in the presence of being as I am, which he called resting in the lap of Ishvara. So we're just going to try this. Okay, so what I want you to do, we're just going to quietly come back to ourselves as we are, with the understanding that the as I am is precisely the location of the presence of God. The presence of God is not away from what I'm like, no matter what I'm like is like. I'm just going to come back to the actual living feel of myself. Because it's there, I'm seeing it. And I'm just going to remain and rest in the presence of being as I am. No trying to be aware, just simply remaining as I am, which is not possible without the light of awareness. The light of awareness brings me back to exactly as I am. And I'm going to rest as I am in this light of awareness. And I'm going to let it carry me. Okay, Marilyn, what did you notice?
First, I noticed like a warmth spreading over my skin and my heart beating, which I don't often notice my heart beating.
Mhm.
And my breath, some disturbance from what I was just pulled to in my mind and emotions. Just notice that.
Mhm.
And then a kind of spreading, like whenever I feel those words, what I'm like is the given, and therein lies the giver. That's like, that melts my heart, like a spreading love in my heart. A spreading love
Mhm.
is what I noticed.
Now, it's very interesting you say that, because the thing is that when we talk about God as wisdom, compassion, wisdom is the light that's showing you exactly what you're like. But also, when you're filled with compassion, you find yourself in a kind of there's no resistance, there's acceptance.
Yeah.
Do
I
you
let
see
go.
that? Yeah, and it's not that you let go, it's that in the light of the presence of this awareness, you find yourself letting go, because you're just simply resting and being. Very, very good. Very good. Kevin.
Initially, I was thinking, what should be happening here? And then just finding myself accepting whatever, however it was like.
Yep.
I suddenly found myself just being peaceful.
Being peaceful, yes.
With no effort on my part, no cognitive cleverness on my part.
No. No doing
and-
and thinking.
And from the side, which is the thinking side, I wouldn't imagine this was imminently available.
No, because it's unthinkable.
Prior to that.
Yeah, you can't think about being, you can only be being. This is the problem. It's not away from you as an object. Everything else is away from you, but being is not away from you. Being is the heart of your heart. Okay, very good. Patricia.
Just had the little puppy on me that had escaped at the very beginning of the session, and I found myself being receptive to however she was moving on me, and responding to more her very naturally and very calmly, and very pleasant. Nothing taking me away, or other than
Dayananda said something very interesting once. He said that in acceptance, you find yourself acceptable. So we hope for accepting in a psychological state, but when we actually accept what's happening in front of us, we're literally in a relationship where we're not resisting, we're just simply accepting. Our appreciation of ourselves becomes simple, because we're being, and we have that beautiful saying in our Western scriptures, God is love. So remember, love is existentially, love is being, accepting. So God is love. Those who are abiding in love are abiding in God, and God's abiding in them. Now, isn't that interesting?
that's lovely.
And we also have this other beautiful saying, which I quite like: perfect love casts out fear. So when that feeling of composure that comes about, what is that? It's because we're lifted out of fear in the presence of this light, this presence of God. Very good, Patricia. John.
I was reflecting on something you've said in the past, of course, that we have nothing to give Ishvara but our subjectivity.
Yeah.
And so I was reflecting on in the pause here, because it's like Ishvara is all.
Yep.
Right?
Is all. Yes.
All. So the subjectivity is just this stuff.
Yeah.
That's counter to being present with all, or what is.
It's seeing a snake.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to mention that actually with Bob, and when you were talking about the SOB thing.
Yeah.
You know, the rope snake, my favorite.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Down the road.
Yeah. Very good. Amy.
At first, it's like you're looking for it to feel a certain way, or
Mhm.
it seems unnatural at first. Maybe that's the way
Yeah,
to
yeah.
say it.
Mhm.
But of course, it is natural. And, I just, your words to just be with everything that's there it's very helpful. It reminds me of what it's supposed to be.
Well, you're Catholic, Amy, and what St. Thomas Aquinas says is a beautiful thing. He says, prayer is the raising of our heart and mind to God. Normally our hearts and minds are caught in the world and caught in our problems and our difficulties and all of this sort of stuff. To be prayerful is a wonderful thing. Do you know what I mean? So to actually be prayerful, in which our mind and our heart is raised to God, is a wonderful thing. Very necessary for us. Without it, we're lost. Very good. Robert, we're expecting great things from you, mate.
So I like Kevin said, there was a sense of peacefulness.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was noticed, it just sort of seen that the mind was going, okay, so where's the difference now? It's like looking for the transformation. But that, that was just observed.
That's just the way that's exactly right. The mind, the so-called mind, is the thoughts. We have thoughts like, there's got to be more than this. I've got to get something here. Do you know what I mean? Because our whole, whereas when we just we just are alive to the facts of the thoughts, because those thoughts are also the presence of Ishvara, because they are part of the given. So when you have the thought that, there's something happening, that it's only when you become the thinker that's the problem. When you're being a beer, as opposed to a thinker and a doer, it's different, because in the greater, the lesser is, isn't it? But when you're being the lesser, the greater you can't see. That's a quote.
It struck me that when you said you can't think being.
No.
I thought to myself, wow, the problem is we think we can think being.
Yes,
but we do try to think being.
We do. We try to think being, and we try to do being. Do you know what I mean?
And by the way, I was hoping to just express this question. I've always been intrigued by Shakespeare's, question, to be or not to be.
Yes.
So I'm just throwing it out there. I don't know if it's
that's a very important thing. When you're totally,
what was Shakespeare pointing to with the question?
I can only surmise, because I didn't know Shakespeare personally. But the thing is that we normally take our life to be, when we're identified with our functions, we take our very life to be thinking, feeling, physiological reactions and actions. We take that to be our life. And when we're enclosed in that identification, there is no God as far as we're concerned. But notice that when we're rooted in being, the thoughts become evident, the feelings become evident, the physical sensations become evident, and what we're doing is evident. But it's wider, it's fullness. Do you see what I mean? So, and also it's abidingly present. It doesn't come and go. Everything else comes and goes. Even this form, this wonderful form that's Robert Watchell, right? That form, as Aristotle said, what comes to be is going to cease to be. It is always subject to the winds of impermanence, isn't it? There's no security there. The only real security is taking refuge in being or in God. All the rest is fluff. Yeah, very good.
Oh, so the question.
Yep.
So to be or not to be, I know there's the part of what comes after.
So that's not
the
being.
arrows of fortune.
Yeah, that's right.
So the suggestion from Shakespeare is to be or to not be.
Yeah, you're not being when you are when you're identified with the psychological functions. You're just caught in a delusion. There's no being there. There's a pretense of life. It's not true and real. It seems true and real, but it's not true and real. The only thing that's true and real is the life, light, and fullness that is God. That's it. And when that light, and fullness obtains in us as wisdom, for example, we're talking today about the wisdom of what God is, even that comes from God. So my understanding, the intellect, when you see beauty, even when you see what Dayananda means by the presence of God, that is wisdom obtaining in you as that way of seeing, isn't it? It's given. And when it's given, you find yourself, what he says, graceful acceptance is born out of your understanding of Ishvara. So and to understand God is not to understand God as an object. To understand God, to stand under the light of understanding. When you're abiding in the appreciation of the presence of God, you are understanding God and you are different. You find yourself being accepting or being loving. You also find yourself filled with the light of awareness, don't you? Isn't that weird? But it's nothing you've done. It's an understanding you live. Very good, Robert.
Thank you.
Michelle.
Well, it's always difficult to talk about an experience where there's the absence of everything and the presence of everything and no duality. There is not much, it's almost like there's no words that can really explain it. But that's how it felt when I was in there.
Yes, now that's a very interesting thing, no duality. Going back to St. Thomas Aquinas, who, as you know, I quite like. He says the most simple of things is being. In other words, it has no parts. My body has parts. Is that true? Or my experience has parts. I'm the looker and that's the looked at. But in being, simple means no parts.
Yeah.
So when you are being simple, you are being in God. Does that make sense? And this is not this is only something you can be. It's a knowing that you can be. So knowing God is being in God. It's not I know that. That's functional duality. Very good point that you brought up, Michelle. Darling. Hello?
Oh, yep. Thinking.
I can't see you. But anyway.
Well, you
Yep.
should be able to see
Microphone
me
there,
now.
Yep.
Yeah, when I talk.
Yep.
Yep. So yeah, so I was just very aware of lots of things happening in my head.
Mm-hmm.
And just the sounds around me and yep, just things going on, like pretty noisy inside and out today. So.
Yeah, but that's the presence of the given.
Mm-hmm.
And you see, this is what's so wonderful about Dayananda's thing, this fullness, it includes everything. It just embraces everything. So what happens is there might be thoughts, there might be calmness. It doesn't matter, because when you're actually abiding in the appreciation of the presence of the given, you're abiding in the appreciation of the presence of reality, and that presence appreciated is the transformative factor. You can't change yourself. It's like what Kevin was saying before. He just found himself being relaxed. He was made to be relaxed by the presence of this light. And this is what Swami Dayananda means by resting in the lap of Ishvara. All right?
Yep.
Now this understanding, or resting in the lap of Ishvara, this is what Swami Dayananda means by karma yoga, remaining the same. You see, in terms of form, I can't remain the same. So I'm always facing an experience in front of me. I'm facing the universe. And it's a universe of appearances, isn't it? And this universe is coming and going. The forms are coming and going. But what's important to understand, the universe is not only what is happening in front of me, but also my reactions to what's happening in front of me, because my reactions are also a manifestation of the laws that I have no control over. So what's happening in front of me includes my thoughts and feelings. And what is necessary is I have to come into a relationship with what's in front of me of acceptance, but I don't do the acceptance. Now, who's ever heard people say, I've got to let go? Who's ever heard the spiritual thing? I must let go. I've got to let go. Well, good luck. What happens if you don't? What if the reality is I don't want to let go? The fact of the matter is, what happens is that, you see, the presence of God is a transforming presence that is constantly drawing you to itself. And as it draws you to itself and lifts you out of your identification with the mind, sense, body complex, you find that you have let go, but you didn't let go. It is let go. Do you see what I mean? So the fact of the matter is, it's so important, and it was a relief for me that I could come to God exactly as I am. So if I'm agitated and effed up and upset, guess what? Is that the given? Yes. Now, what Swami Dayananda says is that self-acceptance, the basis of self-acceptance, is the understanding of Ishvara, not my understanding of myself. Now, isn't that interesting? The understanding of Ishvara. In other words, Ishvara's presence is omnipresent. This presence is embracing me exactly as I am, and it's precisely the point exactly as I am that I encounter Ishvara. So that means that no matter what kind of state or upset that I'm caught up in, what's important is, like, we know that in terms of our external life, we have to render to Caesar what's Caesar. So we need to keep on doing the needful, agreed? Because that keeps us in harmony with what's our functional life. Now, but when it comes to our actual existential state, when we're upset, who's ever had the experience of being upset? Now, some people think that what you do then is you go, okay, I'm not my upset, I'm not my thoughts, and I'm not my feelings and all that stuff. You heard all that? Have you ever heard that sort of stuff? That's true, but that wisdom is something that obtains in you. It's not something you get. So what happens is, here I am, I'm in an existential condition of pain and misery, which is going to come up a lot if we're honest, right? We're going to be shown our pain and misery on a daily basis. When someone says something we don't like, we find ourselves disturbed. Who here finds who here finds it quite easy to be disturbed in this world? Right? Now, so what happens is, here I am, I'm being disturbed, and the light of awareness is showing me I am disturbed. Now, what we normally do when we're disturbed, it's true we must do something about what, in terms of the needful in front of us. So we need to do something in terms of doing the needful. Is that true? But in terms of what we're being, we can't change that. That is the given. So what happens is, when I rest with myself as given, in other words, even though when I'm angry, upset, distraught, lonely, empty, frustrated, if I start depending on myself to do something about that, do you see the dualism there between the resist and the resisted? So when we talk about depending on God, when you sit in a chair, you depend upon the chair. You trust yourself that the chair's going to actually carry you. Is that true? Okay, so you've got faith in the chair. You just allow yourself to be supported. The same way, when you're caught up in any sort of psychophysical emotional state, which you will do, which is great, It's a fantastic thing to realize that you're miserable, you're angry, you're envious, you're hateful, you're empty. It's fantastic, because then you are bringing it to God to be transformed. Do you transform it? No. The embrace of the presence of God lifts you out of it, lifts you out of the identification with it. So by you remaining quietly and prayerfully in the presence of God in your present state, without you trying to do anything about it, is the solution. We think we're the solution. Who's ever tried to manipulate the solution to your existential condition? Who's ever tried to fix themselves? Did it work? It doesn't work. It makes things worse. And you see, this is where, normally we've got two choices when we're upset. We can either dramatize the upset. Well, that doesn't work. That causes lots of trouble. Who's noticed that when you dramatize your emotional reactions, it's normally not good? Who's noticed that? Or you can repress and deny them. But that doesn't work either. But beyond these two opposites, there is this, what Dayananda calls abiding in God, or being relaxed in the lap of Ishvara. Here I am like this, and I'm going to relax as this in this light and let this light operate on me. Does that make sense? It's like if you're cold, if you're in a dark room, it's dark and it's also cold and miserable. The only thing that transforms us is the light, or the presence of this light, because it warms us up, like what you were talking about, Marilyn, and it dispels the darkness. We cannot do it. Even when we're talking here, and you might sort of have that moment where you're just seeing what I'm talking about. You're seeing what I'm talking about, intellectus. You're seeing what I'm talking about. That is the presence of God obtaining in you as the light of wisdom. It gives you a new set of eyes. God gives you his seeing as your seeing. Does that make sense? So you're seeing in the light of reality. It's not dualistic. When you're being wise, it is the wisdom obtaining in you as your wisdom, as your way of seeing, which is new. It doesn't come from your psychophysical processes. And that's why it's non-dualistic. Do you know what I mean? And that's why in Vedanta, to see is to be. And you know how Dayananda says, Vedanta is you. So when you are seeing through the eyes of wisdom, which is given, you change. So that wisdom is you. You can't help but be what you are. Be as you see. Now, you know that when Robert thinks that someone is an SOB, he can't help but be as he's seeing. And if you're seeing someone as an SOB, you can't help but be angry and self-righteous, can you? Can't help it. All right. So, Robert, what's the main take-home point for you today?
Self-acceptance is what comes to mind.
Right, and it doesn't come from you. It's not something you give to yourself, is it?
Yeah.
When you're
yes, you don't.
No. So when you're
Right.
being accepting, you find yourself acceptable. So it's only when you're accepting what's in front of you are you acceptable. And that's the whole understanding, that where Dayananda says it's only by understanding Ishvara do you have self-acceptance. Very good. Michelle, what stands out for you today?
I think it's because it's easy to be in the world and always assessing things, and we get caught in that because even a competition about it, and then we get to, like today, just to be reminded that that's not reality. Reality is something very different, and it's right there available to me. that is, yeah, I am, yeah, that I'm really grateful for that.
You're right. We get caught in the soup all the time, the soup of darkness and psychological misery, which we take to be the truth. We take it to be our life. That's why that idea of prayer, raising our hearts and minds to God, is actually a very good thing if we understand what it means, because we kind of go, right? And what happens is it enables us to become aware of the presence of God as opposed to the story that's happening in front of us and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Very good. Amy.
I'm reminded how accessible this is to us, how generous the Lord is, if you want to say it that way, and how accessible it is to us at all times. Renews my faith in it. I think what we've talked about tonight.
And remember, when we talk about faith, is we have faith in something is to actually place our trust in something. It's not, you see, faith has got two meanings. One, faith in the French means trust. In another meaning, it means belief. We're not talking about belief. So what happens is when I entrust myself to the presence of God, I come as I am, I leave myself in his hands, and I simply wait. And I'm a recipient of grace, and that grace transforms me. That grace alone is what transforms me. All the rest is fluff. And I don't have to think something, I don't have to do something. It is purely and utterly given. Very good. John.
When I catch myself being grateful for the fact that I'm angry or sad or something like that, as opposed to remaining in it, then I know I'm in the lap and not trying to find the lap.
Yes.
Way to surmise it.
Now, that's a very interesting point. When you can only remain with yourself as you are in the light of awareness. You notice that? So that very perception of you as you are is the manifestation of that light. That is the starting point, and it's also the end point. So myself as I am, right here, right now as I am, that's the starting point. The end point is right here, right now as I am. And that's what Dayananda meant.
Journey without distance.
Sorry?
The journey without distance.
The journey without distance. That's what he means. Okay. And it's only knowledge. Only understanding can do this. You know, it's not, if there's no gnosis, then people struggle and they try and work it out and all of that stuff. You know, when he said to me, simply be your simple naked self. When I was asking him a question, I was trying to work it out and all. Being your simple naked self is a very honest act, isn't it?
Well, I think if you try to, I don't want to be angry, has never
Yeah,
worked.
that's nuts. Yes.
So
that's right.
so it's better to say, I am grateful that I can have the experience of being angry.
That's exactly
because
right.
that's the only way to get out of that box.
That's right. And the very fact, the first recognition that you're actually angry, the actual feel of your anger, not your thought about anger, what's happening is the light of awareness is penetrating into that very anger, and you're just letting it just simply come in and penetrate and penetrate and penetrate. And then you're drawn out of it by that very light and life. So the doorway is not away from yourself. That's fantastic, John. Good. Patricia.
That understanding word, standing under,
Mm-hmm.
that's just beautiful.
Yeah.
Standing under the
Standing under the light. Yeah. That's understanding. Yeah. Yeah. Very good. Kevin.
with that understanding is seeing. It's not my thought processes.
No.
So it's relating very much to being. What I find more and more that it comes to me more and more where I find myself just abiding in being. I didn't choose it. If I do embrace it, I do welcome it, and just how dangerous it is. Even when I think when I'm out of that, I think my life is quite well or going quite well. Just how dangerous that is. You know, it's sort of because it's not reality. It's I'm having a pleasant experience of myself then, rather than being alive to facts. If you
We
like.
lose a tremendous amount by being caught in subjectivity. The only way we can open up to a real life is to be freed of subjectivity, and the only way we're freed of subjectivity is when we're filled with reality. So that reality, as you say, it intrudes in on us all of the time. It's like a bit like Amy says, it's always there, constantly there, unreservedly there. It's that we are not there.
And I really like this idea of prayer, not petitionary prayer where I'm asking for something, but the prayer where you're just being alive to what is, shown what is, this light of awareness, presence of God, showing my existential condition.
Yeah.
And in one sense being bathed by his light and lifted out of my subjective notions, my private world of delusion, which I take to be real. So I love St. Thomas Aquinas' definition of prayer. Prayer is the raising of our hearts and minds to God, abiding in God, being in God.
It's magnificent.
Forever grateful.
Marilyn.
Yes, I find myself more and more being compassionate towards that delusion. In the past, I would kick and scream, and resist so badly. And now, as you say, what's in front of me includes that. The given includes that. And so.
And can I also say something? When we're filled with the compassion that is God, we're given compassionate eyes. So we find
compassionate eyes.
Yeah. So when we're filled with the compassion that is God, we find ourselves being kind, not only to ourselves, but to everything and everybody. Isn't it funny?
Not just kind, but seeing everything as seeing myself as so precious. Even the delusion is precious. Somehow it's a part of the perfection. It has to be.
Yeah. Well, well, the basis of everything is God, but Dayananda says not a two-way equation. The water never becomes the rough wave or the smooth waves, but the rough waves are the water. So it's not that God is, but the thing is that, like you're right, what happens is when we see through the eyes of compassion, all of the condemnation goes, all of the hatred goes. We can look at ourselves without hatred, and we can look at ourselves honestly at the darkness without fear through compassionate eyes. And that's a very important thing that you bring up. Very good, Marilyn. Darling.
So it's like, how can I say this? God is the solution to all my to all my problems. And my dependence on myself and others to fix those problems hasn't worked, and it will never work. I see that clearer and clearer. That the resistance is there when I'm shown what I'm like, but also there's a gratefulness at the same time that I am shown what I'm like.
Yes.
And that's when I need to don't do my usual.
Yep.
Criticizing myself or whatever, but just staying with it.
Yes.
And as the solution to
Yes.
that problem.
Yeah. Depending on God to solve it, not yourself. You're not depending on yourself. You're depending on this light and fullness that is abidingly present to take care of it, to resolve the problem. Yeah. Very good, darling. So I'm just going to finish off with this quote from Eckhart again, because I happen to quite like this quote. And it's very Vedanta-ish, but we'll take this guy Meister Eckhart got into serious trouble with the church. Most of the Catholic writers I like ended up in jail, but but they did like him. Even the Pope liked him. They liked him as a person. They loved him, but they knew that politically they had to get rid of him. So even when the findings came out, the Pope said they're not to release the findings until he died. Until he died, then they burnt all his books, you know. So, but so this is what he says: the soul is one with God and not united. Here is a simile. If we fill a tub with water, the water in the tub is united, but not one with it. For where there is water, there is no wood, and where there is wood, there is no water. Now take the wood and throw it in the middle of the water. Still, the wood is only united and not one with the water. It is different with the soul. She becomes one with God and not united, for where God is, the soul is, and where the soul is, God is. Is that beautiful, or is that beautiful? Okay, that's what they mean by non-duality, the teaching of non-duality, I believe. All right, well, thank you very, very much. It's lovely to see all you people again.
Thank you, Bede. Thank you.
And look
Thank
after
you.
yourself.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.